You have imagined it more times than you can count. The relief of a full account, the freedom of money that does not run out. You have pictured what abundance would feel like, rehearsed it in quiet moments, held it in your mind before sleep. And then you opened your bank account, and the number was exactly what it was before. Not growing, not moving, unchanged, as though all that inner effort had produced nothing at all. The belief runs deep. If you think about wealth long enough, wealth will come. This is what so many have been told, and told again. Thought creates reality, so think about money, and money will appear. But the thought remains invisible, and the account remains empty, and the gap between imagination and evidence begins to hollow something out. What most people do not yet understand is that thought does not become cash simply by existing in the mind. Living thought must pass through a sequence, a law, before substance answers it. Wallace Wattles spent years moving through poverty before he understood the principle that governs visible wealth. His conclusion was exact and unsparing. Thought impresses form upon the formless substance that underlies all things, and that impressed form moves toward visible expression. But cash is not where the process begins. Cash is where it ends. It is late-stage evidence of something that was first formed in the mind, held in faith, energized by gratitude, and expressed through efficient action. The law has a sequence. Most people attempt only the first step. This video will trace that sequence from its invisible beginning to its physical conclusion, from living thought to cold, hard cash. Every stage of the law will be made clear, because the law is not mystical, it is operational. But here is the question that will shape everything that follows. What if you have already begun the process mentally, holding your desired form with real intention, yet stopped the conversion before the money channel ever opened? If so, the thought never dies, but the cash never arrives. The reason for that is exactly what comes next. Every morning carries a version of the same hope. Somewhere beneath the routine, beneath the obligations and the open emails, there is a thought of a different financial life. More money, fewer limits, an account that does not need to be checked with anxiety before every purchase. The thought arrives almost automatically because the desire for it is genuine, because the human spirit does not naturally accept scarcity as its permanent condition. But the day passes and the money does not move. The bills arrive at the same time they always do. The balance reflects the same income from the same source that has always supplied it. And there is a particular kind of discouragement that comes not from failure of effort, but from failure of a method you believed in. You were not lazy, you were not careless, you held the thought. You imagined the wealth. And still, nothing changed. Hope in this pattern has a rhythm. It rises at the beginning of each new attempt, each new technique, each new chapter of a book about abundance, and it falls again, slowly, across weeks where the account does not answer. After enough cycles of rise and fall, the discouragement deepens into something more dangerous than frustration. It begins to feel like evidence, evidence that the law does not work, evidence that thought has no real power over money. That is the moment when many people quietly abandon the teaching, not loudly, not in a declaration, but in a slow retreat from belief. They still use the words. They still say they believe in creative law. But inside, the certainty has eroded, replaced by a kind of hoping without expecting that is neither faith nor surrender. The thought about wealth continues to move through the mind, but it moves like something hollow, because the viewer has begun, without knowing it, to doubt the very mechanism they are trying to use. There is a version of metaphysical practice that feels complete but is missing its most important elements. It begins with a thought about money, not a clear and specific mental form, but a feeling, a wash of imagined abundance, the sense of having enough without a precise picture of what enough would actually look like. This kind of thinking is comfortable because it requires very little of the mind. It asks only for a pleasant emotion, not a definite form. The thought becomes emotional fantasy. Money in general, freedom in general, relief from pressure, imagined at the level of sensation rather than constructed as a specific, held mental image. And the imagination, when it operates at that level, does not produce conviction. It produces a pleasant feeling that passes. A pleasant feeling that passes does not impress substance. Passing feelings are not living thoughts. Then there is the waiting. After the imagining, after the feeling of pleasant abundance briefly visited, the person stops. They have done what they understood as the work. Now they will allow the universe to respond. They hold a kind of passive openness, a spiritual readiness to receive, while taking no action that could serve as a channel. Wattles was direct about this. Waiting without efficient action is not faith. It is incompletion dressed in the language of trust. The final layer of this incomplete practice is the most self-defeating of all, speaking abundance with the mouth while expecting lack in the gut. A person can say every correct thing about wealth and still, beneath the surface, feel that none of it applies to their particular situation. Their income is what it is. Their creditors are real. Their history with money has been what it has been, and that hidden expectation of lack quietly cancels the impression they are trying to make. The mouth forms the thought of wealth. The deep mind broadcasts the thought of scarcity. Substance receives both, and the result is confusion without clear form. Vague thought produces vague impression. This is not a moral judgment. It is how the mechanism operates. When a form is not clearly defined in the mind, when it is not held as a specific thing desired with specific conviction, the impression it makes upon the substance is correspondingly diffuse. A diffuse impression cannot organize itself into visible result. The substance responds to the sharpness of the form. Without sharpness, there is no organized movement toward expression. Doubt goes further than vagueness. Vagueness simply fails to create a form. Doubt actively dissolves one that has begun to take shape. Every moment of genuine disbelief in the process, every quiet conviction that this particular person, in this particular financial situation, cannot be reached by the law, erodes the impression already made. It is not unlike water finding a crack. The form that was being built begins to lose its coherence, and the substance that was beginning to organize around it disperses back into formlessness. Ungrateful attention compounds the problem in its own way. When the eyes return constantly to what is absent, when the mind narrates lack rather than moving in the direction of the impressed form, the relational connection between the thinker and source is strained. Wattles taught that gratitude is not sentiment. It is a functional link between the mind and the supply it requires. An ungrateful mind is a mind partially disconnected from what it needs. It is not merely feeling less good. It is, in the language of the law, less connected to the source of its own abundance. Inaction does something distinct from any of the above. It closes the channel. Thought can impress substance. Faith can hold the form. Gratitude can maintain the connection to supply. But none of that brings money into actual exchange without a physical channel through which it can move. Money does not appear from nowhere in the physical world. It moves through contacts, transactions, work, service, opportunity, and exchange. Without action that opens those contacts, there is nowhere for the moving substance to arrive. The conversion sequence cannot complete itself. Cash, which is physical evidence of completed conversion, never becomes visible. Cash is visible substance that has been organized and moved through a channel into your possession. It is not an accident. It is not a reward for good intentions. It is the physical end point of a sequence that begins in the invisible and must, by the nature of physical reality, pass through physical contact before it takes the form of money. The most important thing to understand about cash is that it arrives through channels, and channels are always opened by action. Living thought is the beginning of that sequence, but the thought must be genuinely alive to do its work. It must be definite enough to form an impression. It must be believed enough to hold the impression under time and delay. It must be embodied, not merely imagined, meaning it must shape the behavior of the person holding it. A thought that does not change what you do has not yet become living in the full sense Wattles intended. The law that converts thought into cash is not vague or mystical. It has a structure. Every component of that structure has a specific function. Removing any one of them interrupts the conversion, which is exactly why so many people experience the mental beginning of the process without ever reaching the financial end of it. Understanding the structure changes everything, because you can no longer confuse an incomplete process with a failed law. What follows is that structure, traced from its beginning in the invisible to its completion in the physical. From the first moment of definite thought to the moment cash has moved into exchange and arrived as evidence. The law Wattles taught is not about imagination alone. It is about the entire chain of causation, and every link in that chain will be examined here. A thought becomes living when two things are present simultaneously. It is definite and it is believed. A definite thought has shape. It is not merely a direction or a feeling of desire. It is a formed image of a specific thing, held in the mind with clarity, returned to consistently, and known rather than simply wanted. Belief transforms that definite thought into something operative. Without belief, a thought may be clearly pictured and still remain inert, a mental object without motion. The combination of form and conviction is what Wattles meant when he spoke of a thought being truly alive. A living thought impresses form upon the formless substance. This is the central mechanism. The substance that Wattles described is not distant or abstract. He taught it as something intimate, something already present in and around all things, responsive to the thoughts of thinking beings. When thought carries both definiteness and conviction, it reaches into that substance and organizes it. The impression is the beginning of visible result. Everything that has ever appeared in the physical world as wealth, as money, as any material condition, began with an organized impression in the invisible. Faith is not a feeling of optimism. In Wattles' framework, it is the force that keeps the impressed form intact across the interval between thought and visible result. That interval can be long. During it, nothing visible appears to confirm that the impression is holding. Every ordinary perception argues against the process. Faith is what maintains the coherence of the form through that interval. A person who holds the form with faith is not pretending the delay is not real. They are choosing to keep the organized impression alive, regardless of what the physical senses report in the meantime. Gratitude operates differently from faith. While faith holds the form, gratitude maintains the relationship. Wattles was specific about this. The more completely gratitude fills the mind, the more directly the mind is connected to the inexhaustible supply from which all visible things proceed. Gratitude is not practiced as a mood or a discipline of positive thinking. It is the active, open acknowledgement of the source that makes all wealth possible, and it keeps the connection between the thinker and that source clear and strong. A grateful mind has a different relationship to supply than an anxious one, and that difference is operational. Efficient action is the final element of the law as Wattles stated it, and it is the element without which all the others remain suspended in the invisible. Action creates contact. Contact creates the channel through which the organized substance can move into physical expression as money. There is no passage from invisible form to physical cash without an action-created channel. The action does not have to be dramatic. It must be efficient, meaning it must be the action most suited to opening exchange in the present moment. When these 5 elements operate together, thought converts to cash with the same lawfulness by which a river follows its course. Wattles wrote, "The science of getting rich," as something that sounded like its title, a science, not a philosophy of consolation. He was not interested in helping people feel better about lack. He was interested in tracing the exact causal sequence by which wealth reaches a person. His conclusions were serious and specific. He did not offer vague assurances. He offered a principle and a method, and he made clear that the principle operated with consistency, not with preference. Central to everything he taught was the insistence that creative thought and efficient action are inseparable. They are not two options. They are not two stages where one follows and replaces the other. They are simultaneous requirements of the law. A person who thinks creatively but acts inefficiently, or who acts efficiently but thinks from scarcity, has separated what the law requires to be joined. Separation of thought and action produces exactly the frustration that most people experience. Inner effort that does not reach visible conclusion. Money does not appear through fantasy. Wattles understood this precisely and said it repeatedly across his work. The substance responds to thought. But substance does not teleport gold into a closed room with no channel. It organizes itself, and moves in the direction of visible expression, and that movement needs a physical pathway. That pathway is created by a person who acts in alignment with the thought they have impressed upon substance. The money arrives through the channel the action opened, not through the imagination that began the process. To act in the certain way is to act with the consciousness of the law operating, not from urgency, not from panic, not from the desperation of a person who believes that effort alone produces wealth. Acting in the certain way means doing present work completely, giving full value, moving in the direction the living thought indicates, and trusting that the action is opening the channel rather than needing to force the result. It is purposeful, faithful, grateful action, and it is as essential to the Wattles system as the thought itself. Thinking about cash is not the same as thinking the living thought that creates cash. This distinction is the source of enormous confusion. The mind can hold an image of money, repeat affirmations about abundance, and picture a wealthier life in considerable detail, all without any of that constituting a living thought in Wattles' sense. A living thought is not characterized by its subject matter. It is characterized by its quality, definite, believed, held with faith, supported by gratitude, and expressed through efficient action. A thought about money that lacks any of these qualities is a dead thought, regardless of how detailed or pleasant the imagery. Living thought carries conviction that moves downward through the entire person, not just through the surface of the mind. It is recognizable by its effect on behavior. When a thought is truly alive, it governs what a person does. It changes where they go, what they say, what they prepare for, what opportunities they pursue, and how they conduct their present work. A person holding a living thought about wealth does not act exactly as they would have acted had they held no such thought. The living thought reorganizes the life of the person holding it, and that reorganization is part of how the channel opens. Indefinite thought about wealth collapses under delay because it was never deep enough to sustain itself. When weeks pass and money has not visibly appeared, the thought that was once pleasant but shallow loses its emotional support and fades. The person is left without the form they were attempting to hold, without the faith that would have maintained it, and very often with an increased cynicism about the process that makes the next attempt even harder. Shallow thought does not collapse because the law failed. It collapses because it was never alive in the way the law requires. A living thought does not change its form because evidence is temporarily absent. This is one of its defining qualities. The person who truly holds a living thought about a specific financial reality does not abandon that form every time the bank account fails to confirm it. They hold the form precisely because they understand that absence of visible evidence is not evidence of law failure. The form exists in the invisible before it exists in the visible. The interval between invisible impression and visible result is not the failure of the process, it is the process. A living thought also stays definite. One of the most common interruptions to the conversion sequence is the habit of changing the desired form. A person imagines one financial reality, holds it for some days, loses patience, shifts to a different target, then abandons that in favor of something else. This is not flexibility. It is a sequence of incomplete impressions, none of which has had sufficient time and sustained faith to organize substance toward visible result. Each new form begins from nothing. The conversion never advances. The title of this teaching is concrete, deliberately so. Cold, hard cash. The bluntness of that phrase is intentional because one of the greatest failures in metaphysical teaching is the tendency to make the promised result so abstract that no one can actually recognize it when it arrives or measure when it is absent. The law Wattles taught ends in physical evidence, not in a feeling of alignment. It ends in money. Wattles' law does not conclude with inner peace, though inner peace may accompany it. It does not conclude with a sense of spiritual abundance, though that too may be present. The law completes itself when the invisible, the impressed form, the organized substance, the faith-held image, passes through a physical channel and becomes transactional reality. An exchange happens. A payment arrives. An opportunity that had no prior physical existence enters the physical world and brings money with it. This is why cash specifically is the correct word for the end of the conversion. Cash is the most physically concrete form that money takes. It is the final evidence that the entire sequence has been completed. When the impression was made, when the faith held, when the gratitude maintained the connection to supply, and when the action opened the channel, something moved through the invisible to visible gap. The cash that arrived is not just money, it is proof of law. It is what living thought looks like once the conversion has run its full course. Nothing in this teaching should be confused with financial advice. The channel may take 1,000 different forms: a contact, a service, an exchange of skill, an opportunity that organized itself into a transaction. The teaching is not prescriptive about the specific mechanism of the channel. It is prescriptive about the inner sequence that makes any channel possible. The cash that arrives is evidence of conversion. It is the physical answer to the invisible question the living thought asked of substance. The substance does not withhold. That is also essential to Wattles' position. There is no shortage in the formless. The supply from which visible wealth is organized is not diminished by demand. The failure to receive is never a failure of supply. It is a failure of conversion, a failure somewhere in the sequence between living thought and open channel. Understanding this removes the most paralyzing belief of all, that money is limited, and that the arrival of wealth for one person necessarily denies it to another. The law does not operate within those limits. The first element of the mechanism is a definite mental form, not a vague desire for more, not a general wish for financial freedom. A specific thing, a clear picture of the wealth condition desired, held in the mind with enough precision that the mind can return to it consistently without losing its shape. Wattles taught that the substance responds to the sharpness of the form, and that sharpness begins in the precision of the thought. The thinker must know what they are asking substance to organize. Alongside the definite form is emotional conviction, which is not to be confused with excitement. Conviction is the steady inner certainty that what is being impressed upon substance is real in the invisible before it is visible in the physical. Excitement rises and falls with external circumstances. Conviction holds regardless of them. A person who holds the form of a specific financial reality with calm, unwavering certainty is applying emotional conviction as the law requires. The absence of that certainty, the privately held doubt about whether this actually applies to them, is the hidden sabotage most people never identify. The third element is gratitude, which functions as the operative connection between the thinker and the source from which all substance proceeds. A mind moving in continuous gratitude for what already is, for the capacity to think, for the inexhaustible nature of supply, for the evidence already present of abundance in any form, is a mind that has kept its connection to what it needs open. Gratitude is not performed for external effect. It is the inner orientation that determines the quality of the relationship between the thinker and the invisible substance they are asking to organize. Faithful continuity is what keeps the mechanism running across the inevitable gap between invisible impression and visible result. The gap is real. Time passes. The form that was impressed does not appear instantly as cash in the physical world. Faithful continuity means returning to the form, maintaining the conviction, and keeping the gratitude active across that interval. It is the refusal to let the process collapse simply because the clock is running. Every return to the form is an act of faith. Every act of faith extends the coherence of the impression in substance. Speech must align with the form. This element is often underestimated. A person who holds a living thought internally and then speaks contradiction over it externally has introduced a counter-impression. Words are not neutral. When spoken with feeling, they carry their own impression into the substance. A person who privately forms the thought of wealth and publicly speaks the thought of lack has set two impressions against each other. The living thought requires that what is spoken match what is held inside, not as performance but as consistency of the whole person. Finally, there is action that gives the thought a money channel. Every element before this one is invisible. The action is what makes the transition to the physical possible. The action the law requires is not frantic activity or anxious effort. It is the single most appropriate present action available to this person in this moment, the action most suited to opening some form of exchange. Taken from a position of faith rather than desperation, this action does not force the result. It creates the pathway through which the organized substance can arrive as money. Without it, the entire invisible sequence has no point of entry into the physical world. The conversion begins the moment a definite thought is formed and believed. In that moment, the thought is no longer simply an idea in someone's mind. It is an instruction given to the formless. Wattles described the substance as responsive, as permeated with and governed by the thinking that occurs within it. A thought that is both definite and believed does not merely reside in the brain. It reaches outward, or rather it reaches inward, to the level of substance where things are still formless and capable of being organized. The impression is the beginning. The image formed in the definite thought is the specific shape of that impression. Substance receiving the impression begins to move in the direction of organizing itself according to that image. This is not metaphorical in Wattles' teaching. It is the literal mechanism he described. The formless does not have a will that opposes the thinker. It has a nature that responds to thought, the way water takes the shape of its container, not because it is forced, but because response is its nature. Faith prevents the collapse of the impression during the interval. The organized movement of substance takes time to produce visible physical result. During that time, the thinker's continued faith functions as the sustained signal that keeps the organized movement active. A withdrawal of faith, a moment of genuine conviction that nothing is happening and nothing will happen, is not neutral. It introduces a counter-signal. Whether the impression holds or dissolves depends partly on whether the thinker's faith continues across the interval. Gratitude maintains the relationship between the thinker and the supply from which the organizing substance draws its material. In practical terms, this means that a grateful mind stays relationally open to the source of wealth, while an anxious or resentful mind partially closes that relationship. The movement of substance toward visible result is not merely mechanical. It depends on the quality of the thinker's inner alignment with what supplies it. Gratitude is not optimism. It is the acknowledgement of supply that keeps the inner connection to that supply active and clear. Action creates physical contact. The organized movement of substance in the invisible has produced by this point in the sequence a set of conditions in the invisible that are ready to become visible. But they cannot become visible without a point of contact in the physical world. The person with a living thought must do something, must reach out, serve, show up, offer, exchange, in a way that introduces their physical presence into the domain where the organized substance can meet them. Without action, there is no contact. Without contact, there is no channel. The money channel opens at the point of contact. This is a specific, identifiable event, though the thinker may not recognize it in the moment. A conversation that leads somewhere. An offer that was possible because they were present. An idea that arrived because they were in the act of doing, rather than waiting. The channel is not supernatural. It is the natural pathway created by the combination of impressed substance-seeking expression and the human action that gives it a physical entry point. Cash appears as the final evidence of the completed sequence. When the channel is open and the organized substance has passed through it into physical exchange, money changes hands. A service is rendered and compensated. An opportunity is met and accepted. A transaction occurs that would not have occurred had the living thought not been impressed, had the faith not held, had the gratitude not maintained the connection, had the action not created the contact. The cash is the evidence. The entire invisible process is visible in that single physical result. Thinking vaguely about wealth is the first and most common interruption. When the thought lacks a specific form, when it is a feeling of wanting more rather than a clear mental image of a defined financial reality, the impression made upon substance is correspondingly formless. The substance moves because even vague thought influences it, but without a specific form to organize toward, the movement has no direction. The thinker waits for a result that the substance without a clear target cannot produce. Secretly expecting poverty is more devastating than vague thought, because expectation carries a different weight than desire. A person may desire wealth at the surface of the mind, while expecting poverty at the deeper level where conviction lives. That deeper conviction is the actual instruction being sent to the substance. Expectation is not what people say they believe. It is what they genuinely feel will happen when no one is watching and the pleasant thoughts are not being actively performed. Secret expectation of poverty is the hidden counter-impression that cancels living thought. Refusing present action breaks the chain at the final link. No matter how well the invisible sequence has proceeded, no matter how definite the thought, how strong the faith, how clear the gratitude, if the thinker will not take the action available to them in the present moment, the channel cannot open. The refusal of action is often dressed as spiritual trust, the idea that true belief requires no action, that acting implies doubt. Wattles rejected this absolutely. Action is not the opposite of faith. It is faith's physical expression. Complaining about current money is another form of counter-impression. When attention moves to what is lacking, when the mind's narration is occupied with the inadequacy of the present financial condition, the thought being sent to substance is a thought of lack. That thought makes its own impression. It does not cancel the desire for wealth, but it competes with it, introducing a second signal that works against the organization the living thought began. Changing the desired form constantly prevents any single impression from reaching completion. Each time the thinker abandons one form in favor of another, the substance that had begun organizing around the first form disperses. The new form begins from nothing. No single impression ever receives the sustained faith and patient action it requires to complete the conversion. The thinker experiences a persistent sense that the law is not working, when in fact what is not working is their commitment to a single, sustained, defined form. Treating cash as impossible unless the current salary can explain it is a particularly limiting interruption, because it applies the logic of visible channels to the question of invisible law. The law is not constrained by existing income. Supply is inexhaustible. The channel through which cash arrives does not have to be the same channel through which it has always arrived. A person who judges the possibility of wealth by the current size of their paycheck has decided in advance that the law's range is limited to their current circumstances. That decision is not a financial observation. It is a thought, and it makes its impression. A seed does not become a harvest because someone found it beautiful and admired it in their palm. Its potential is real, perhaps extraordinary, but potential alone produces nothing. The seed can be carried indefinitely in a pocket, studied, shown to others, believed in sincerely. It remains a seed. The harvest requires something more than admiration. It requires that the potential of the seed meet the conditions that allow it to become what it was always capable of becoming. Planting the seed is the act of making thought definite and impressing it upon substance. The seed must enter the ground. It must leave the hand of the person holding it and be committed to the earth. Commitment is different from admiration. When the thought is formed with precision and believed, when the impression is made and not immediately withdrawn, the seed has been planted. Something has entered the substance that was not there before. The process of becoming has begun. Keeping the seed and watering it corresponds to faith and gratitude. A planted seed requires ongoing conditions to survive the interval between planting and visible growth. Faith is the refusal to dig the seed up before it has had time to become something visible. Gratitude is the water and the light, the nourishing quality of a mind that stays open to supply. Neglect kills seeds as surely as deliberate harm. A thought planted in faith and then abandoned to doubt does not continue growing. It returns to nothing. The allowance of time is also part of what the metaphor requires. Growth is not instant. The interval between the planting of a seed and the arrival of fruit is determined by the nature of the thing growing, not by the impatience of the grower. A person who plants a living thought and expects cash by Tuesday has misunderstood the nature of the law. This does not mean the process is endless. It means that the organized substance, like the seed in the ground, moves through its own sequence of development, and that sequence cannot be bypassed by urgency. Action brings the harvest into exchange. Fruit hanging on a tree in an orchard where no road has been built and no hand has reached to pick it serves no one. The harvest exists. The growth has occurred. But without the action of bringing it into exchange, the harvest remains outside the world of transaction. Cash is not merely produced, it is exchanged. Someone must bring the fruit to the market. The channel opening action is exactly that, the act of bringing what has been grown invisibly into the place where exchange can occur. The cash is the harvested form. When exchange happens, when the fruit has arrived at the market and been offered and received, the full cycle of conversion is complete. The seed, invisible in the ground weeks earlier, has become something tangible that passes from hand to hand. This is what Wattles meant by money as physical evidence. Cash is the seed come to harvest, the invisible thought arrived in visible form, the organized substance now transactional and real. The law does not end in the ground, it ends at the market. Living thought is the seed form of cash. This is the compression of the metaphor into its simplest statement. Not a metaphor of magic, not an assurance that wishing produces harvest, but a description of a real sequence with real requirements at every stage. Plant it precisely. Keep it alive with faith. Nourish it with gratitude. Build the road and bring the harvest to exchange. The cash will follow because the law is not a promise. It is a sequence, and a sequence completed fully always reaches its conclusion. Most people who pursue wealth through thought are not holding living thought. They hold something that resembles it closely enough to feel indistinguishable from it, but which lacks the essential quality that makes it operative. The thought is there. The desire is real. The images and the feelings have visited the mind many times, but the thought is weak in its conviction, contradicted in its depths, and unsupported by any action that could give it a channel. A thought with these characteristics is not living. It is dead. Dead thought is not inert. It consumes energy, time, and hope. A person investing daily mental and emotional effort into a dead thought is not getting closer to cash. They are reinforcing a pattern that each time it fails to produce visible result makes the next genuine attempt harder. The accumulated disappointment of dead thought is one of the primary reasons people eventually stop believing in the law entirely. They have been trying, but what they have been trying has not been the law as Wattles taught it. The distinction between dead thought and living thought is not a moral one, it is a structural one. A dead thought can be held by a sincere, spiritually serious person who simply has not yet understood the full requirement. Wishing, imagining, and affirming are not equivalent to forming a definite mental image. Impressing it upon substance with conviction, holding it in faith, maintaining the gratitude that keeps the connection to supply open, and taking the action that creates the channel. The desire can be completely genuine, while the thought remains structurally incomplete. Incomplete thought cannot become cash. Dead thought is nearly impossible to identify from the inside, because it arrives wearing the language and the feeling of the law. The person holding dead thought believes sincerely that they are doing what the law requires. The disguise is not malicious. It is the natural result of a partial understanding that has been practiced long enough to feel complete. Examining its specific costumes makes the identification much easier. The first costume is, "I already thought positively." This phrase contains a crucial error, the word already. A living thought is not a past event. It is a current, sustained condition. A person who thought positively once last week or last month and now believes that event should be producing results is confusing a single incomplete action with a sustained living process. Thought must be alive in the present tense, not referenced in the past. The second disguise is, "I visualized money once." Visualization performed as a single session and then released is not sustained impression upon substance. It is more like sketching an idea on paper and then leaving the paper outside in the rain. The sketch was real. The intention behind it was genuine. But a single moment of visualization is not equivalent to a living thought held in faith across the entire interval between impression and visible result. A third form appears as, "I am waiting for it." Waiting is not faith. Waiting is the suspension of action in the belief that the universe prefers to deliver results to passive recipients. Wattles made no such promise. The creative law does not reward passivity. It responds to the combination of inner form and outer action. A person waiting without acting has removed one of the two essential components of the law. What they are practicing is a version of the process with a structural absence, and that absence is the reason the cash does not arrive. Perhaps the most sophisticated disguise is, action would mean I do not trust. This inversion sounds spiritual. It sounds like advanced faith. In fact, it is the single most effective way dead thought protects itself from the challenge that would expose it. Action does not contradict faith in the Wattles system. Faith without efficient action is incomplete law. The person who uses their distrust of action as evidence of their trust in the universe has not transcended the requirement of action. They have simply refused it, and they have given that refusal a spiritual name. The most immediate cost of maintaining dead thought is cynicism. The viewer who practices what they understand as the law and sees no cash result does not conclude that their practice is incomplete. They conclude that the law is unreliable. Every failure of dead thought becomes evidence against the creative principle itself. The cynicism grows with each cycle of effort and disappointment, and cynicism is one of the most difficult inner states to undo because it feels like wisdom earned through experience. The second cost is the loss of faith in creative law as a category of truth. This is deeper than cynicism about a single technique. When enough sincere attempts at metaphysical practice have produced no visible financial result, a person can lose access to the entire framework. The idea that thought influences substance, that the invisible precedes the visible, that inner causation governs outer condition, begins to feel like consolation for the naive rather than operational truth for the serious. And once that framework is gone, the door to genuine conversion closes. Reliance on visible channels only is a third consequence, and it is significant. A person who has given up on invisible causation is left with the assumption that money can only come from sources already producing it. The current job, the current salary, the current financial structure. Every possible increase must be explainable in terms of the existing visible supply. This effectively puts a ceiling on wealth defined by present circumstances, which is precisely what Wattles taught the creative law is designed to remove. By abandoning the invisible mechanism, the person has accepted a limit that the law was never meant to impose. The final cost is that the viewer never turns thought into a money path, not because the law is false, not because they are incapable, because dead thought maintained long enough actually prevents the transition to living thought. It creates a reinforced habit of incomplete practice that becomes the default. And a default that has never produced cash continues to produce no cash, while consuming the very faith and energy that a genuine living thought requires. The first movement out of dead thought is making thought definite. Choose one financial reality and form it in the mind with precision. Not a feeling of abundance, a specific thing, a specific amount, condition, or circumstance defined clearly enough that the mind can hold it steady and return to it without losing its shape. This single act of precision is the first structural difference between dead thought and living thought. It is available right now. Give the thought faith by deciding that the interval between impression and visible result is part of the law, not a sign of its failure. This is a specific inner decision. The absence of cash today does not mean the form is not being held in substance. The form can be alive in the invisible before it is present in the physical. Granting the process its natural interval without demanding immediate visible confirmation is the act of faith that keeps the impression intact. Enter gratitude as a functional act, not as a forced emotion. Find what is already present in any amount of evidence of supply, of capacity, of connection to the source that makes wealth possible. Return to that acknowledgement frequently enough that it shapes the background quality of the mind, rather than appearing only in moments of deliberate effort. This is the element that keeps the channel between the thinker and source open during the interval. It is not optional, it is structural. Take the present action that can open exchange, not the future action that will be possible once circumstances improve, not the dramatic action that would require conditions not yet present. The action available now in this moment's actual circumstances that moves in some direction toward the financial form desired. One contact, one prepared piece of work, one step toward the channel. This action is not the whole of the conversion. It is the critical physical element without which everything else remains in the invisible. Take it, Vague wealth fantasies must stop, not because imagining wealth is wrong, but because imagination without definite form is incapable of making an operative impression. Every hour spent in pleasant but formless wealth feeling is an hour in which no specific impression is being made upon substance. The practice feels productive because it is emotionally comfortable. It is not productive. It is delay shaped like preparation. Calling waiting faith must also stop. The confusion between these two is one of the most persistent sources of metaphysical failure. Faith is active. It is the maintained inner certainty that a specific form is being held in substance during the interval before it appears visibly. It requires continuous inner return to the form, continuous refusal to interpret the absence of visible result as evidence of law failure. Waiting, by contrast, is passive expectation. It does not hold anything. It simply expects arrival without contributing the inner continuity that the process requires. Speaking poverty over the form undoes the impression in a particularly direct way. A person who holds a specific living thought internally and then in conversation narrates their financial lack, their insufficient income, their inability to afford what they need, is sending a competing impression outward with the full weight of spoken conviction. The spoken word of lack does not cancel desire, but it works against the organized substance that was beginning to move toward the desired form. The voice must align with the thought being held, or the thought is being undermined by its own holder. Demanding cash without channel is another pattern that must end. The law does not deliver money apart from a physical pathway. Demanding that wealth appear while refusing to create the action-based contact through which it could move into physical reality is demanding that the sequence complete itself with a missing element. Cash without channel is not a spiritual achievement. It is a logical impossibility within the system Wattles described. The channel must be built by the person who wants the cash. Letting current income define future supply is perhaps the most limiting of all the habits that must be stopped, because it turns a current circumstance into a permanent ceiling. The formless substance is not constrained by present salary. The supply from which wealth is organized does not have a budget. The money that can arrive is not determined by the money that has previously arrived. A person who stops this particular habit of thought does not become reckless. They become open to the full range of what the law is capable of producing. Thought must live. This is not an instruction to feel enthusiastic. It is a structural requirement of the conversion process. The thought must carry definiteness, conviction, and continuity. It must be present in the mind, not as a memory of a desire, but as a currently held, currently believed, specific inner reality. A person who accepts this requirement stops looking for shortcuts. The shortcut is the dead thought. The living thought, maintained in its full form, is the law itself. Substance must be impressed. This means accepting that the thought must do actual work in the invisible. It must reach the substance with enough sharpness and conviction to create an organized impression. This acceptance is significant because it places the responsibility for the impression entirely on the quality of the thought. No external authority performs the impression. No ritual performs it. The thinker performs it through the quality of the mental form they are willing to create and hold. Faith must hold across the interval. Accepting this means accepting that delay is part of the law, not evidence against it. The person who genuinely receives this principle stops measuring the law's success by short-term cash results. They understand that the substance is organizing, that the form is alive in the invisible, and that visible result follows invisible cause with the same consistency as any other sequence of causation. They stop demanding confirmation before the process has reached its conclusion. Gratitude must connect. Accepting this means accepting that the quality of the inner relationship to supply matters. A mind in genuine gratitude is not in the same relationship to source as a mind in resentment or anxiety. This is not moral preference, it is operational difference. The grateful mind maintains the open connection through which organized substance can continue moving toward expression. Accepting this means deliberately cultivating that orientation, not because it feels better, though it may, but because it is part of the law. Action must channel. This is the acceptance most resisted, most misrepresented, and most necessary. Accepting it means accepting that no amount of inner work removes the requirement of physical action. The channel is created by action. Without the channel, the completed invisible sequence has no point of entry into the physical world. Accepting action as an element of the law rather than a failure of faith is the moment the conversion becomes possible. Cash follows the completed sequence. Accepting every element of the sequence means accepting that cash will follow. The new inner position begins with a single declaration that is also a structural reality. My thought becomes cash through lawful action, not eventually, not perhaps. Through lawful action, meaning through the completed sequence that the law specifies. This declaration is not affirmation in the sense of a pleasant phrase repeated without structural backing. It is a statement of the mechanism the person is now operating. Holding the form means returning to the specific, defined mental image of the desired financial reality continuously, across every interval, through every day when the physical evidence has not yet appeared. To hold the form is not to strain or to force. It is to keep coming back with faith to the precise image that was impressed upon substance. The form is held the way a person holds a direction in mind while driving through unfamiliar roads, not rigidly, but continuously. The commitment not to cancel the money channel means declining to take the actions and speak the words that close the pathway through which organized substance is moving toward physical expression. Canceling the channel looks like complaining about current finances with genuine conviction, like abandoning the definite form for a different one, like withdrawing faith before the visible result has had time to appear. Not canceling the channel is the active, ongoing refusal to close what action has opened. Acting in the certain way is the behavioral expression of every inner element already in place. The certain way is not a specific set of business tactics. It is the quality of action taken by a person whose thought is alive, whose faith is holding, whose gratitude is connecting, and whose inner form has organized how they move through the world. Their work is done with full attention and full value. Their contacts are made with genuine purpose. Their movement is in alignment with the form they hold. Acting in the certain way is what the living thought looks like when it reaches the physical world. There are two roads inside the mind that can be taken from this point. One is fantasy, the other is living thought. Fantasy asks very little. It requires only that the mind visit pleasant images, enjoy the emotional relief they provide, and wait for those images to somehow become reality without any completed sequence of conversion. Fantasy is not malicious. It is simply incomplete. It begins the process and then stops at the most comfortable stage, never pressing forward to the stages that are less pleasant, less passive, and more demanding. Living thought asks considerably more. It asks for precision, for the willingness to define a specific form rather than a comfortable emotion. It asks for conviction that goes deeper than surface optimism, for faith that holds not because everything looks encouraging, but because the law is understood to be consistent. It asks for gratitude maintained as an active inner orientation rather than a mood that comes and goes. And it asks for action, taken not from desperation, but from the understanding that the channel the law requires must be physically built. Fantasy imagines and waits. This is its complete description. The imagining is genuine. The desire behind it is real. The waiting is sincere. But the combination of imagining and waiting, without the impressed form, without sustained faith, without gratitude, without action, will not complete the conversion. It cannot, because it is not the law. It is a partial use of the law's vocabulary without the law's structure. Living thought impresses and acts. This is its complete description. The pressing inward, into substance with a definite form believed in with deep conviction, combined with the outward act of creating the physical contact through which organized substance can arrive. The viewer who chooses living thought over fantasy is not choosing a harder life. They are choosing a lawful one, and a lawful process completed fully always reaches its conclusion. The choice is available now. Begin each day with the one practice that separates metaphysical seriousness from casual wishing. Define the cash-related form clearly. Before any other thought establishes itself as the dominant inner condition of the morning, Take the time to form the specific mental image of the financial reality being impressed upon substance. Make it precise enough that the mind can identify it without effort. The clarity of this daily return to the form is itself an act of faith. It is the renewal of the impression. After the form is clear, ask how the thought must live today, not what the thought was yesterday, what it must be right now in the specific circumstances of this day, with the specific opportunities and contacts present in this moment's reality. Living thought is not static. It stays consistent in its form, but it is continuously expressed through the present tense of the thinker's life. The question is always, what does holding this living thought require of me today? From that question, identify the present channel opening action. One action available in today's actual circumstances that moves in the direction of the financial form. Not the action that will become possible when things improve. Not the action that would make sense once more resources are present. The action that is available now, even if it is small, even if its connection to the desired cash result is not immediately obvious. The channel is built incrementally. One contact, one piece of completed work, one step toward exchange. Refuse to measure the process by the current cash balance. The current amount of money in the account is the result of yesterday's process, or last year's, or last decade's. It is not the measure of what the living thought being held today is capable of producing. Looking at the current balance and using it as evidence of what is possible is the error of treating visible effect as the measure of invisible cause. The balance is a record of what has already been. The living thought is addressing what is forming now. Think from source, not salary. This is the perceptual shift that makes all the others possible. Salary is a visible channel. It is real and it is useful, but it is one channel, and the supply of organized substance available to a person holding a living thought is not limited to a single channel. Thinking from source means operating from the knowledge that the supply is inexhaustible, that organized substance is always moving toward the impressed form, and that the specific physical channel through which cash arrives is determined by action, not by the size of the present paycheck. The specific correction is this: replace "I only have this much" with the understanding that cash is the final stage of a conversion process, not the source of it. Cash does not produce more cash through thinking. The source of wealth is the inexhaustible formless substance organized by living thought. What you currently have is evidence of what has already completed its conversion. It is not the ceiling of what can complete conversion in the future. The thought of "only this much" is a thought of a limit that the law does not recognize. Replace "nothing is happening" with "I hold the living thought." The interval between impression and visible result is real. The feeling that nothing is happening is the natural consequence of looking at the physical world for confirmation of an invisible process that has not yet reached the physical stage. In the invisible, something is always happening when a living thought is genuinely held. The impression is in place. The substance is organizing. Faith is maintaining the form. Gratitude is keeping the connection to supply open. The absence of visible cash is not the absence of process. It is the interval before completion. Replace "money is absent" with "the channel is forming through action." Absence of money in the physical world right now is a description of current visible reality, not a report on the state of the invisible sequence. When action is creating contact, when efficient work is being done with full value given, when the thinker is moving in the certain way, the channel is forming. The cash has not arrived yet, but the pathway through which it will arrive is being constructed through every right action taken in alignment with the living thought. Absence of the harvest does not mean the seed is not growing. The discipline of these corrections is not the discipline of self-deception. The current bank balance is real. The absence of cash right now is real. The correction is not a denial of present facts. It is the refusal to treat present facts as the final authority on what the law is producing. Present facts report on the past. The living thought is working on the future. A mind that continuously interprets present facts as the final word about future possibility has given present circumstances the authority to determine what the law can do. Withdrawing that authority from present circumstances and returning it to the law is the specific inner act this discipline produces. Repetition of these corrections across the day is how thought discipline becomes thought habit. No single correction settles the matter permanently. The mind will return to, I only have this much and nothing is happening, and money is absent many times. Each time the correction is applied, each time the living thought is returned to its proper position as the operative inner reality, rather than the passing impression being overridden by external facts. Over time, the corrections become the default, and the default becomes the state from which the law operates most freely. Present work must be done completely. Whatever the task in front of you right now, regardless of whether it seems connected to the specific financial form you are holding, it deserves the full attention and effort of a person operating in the certain way. This is not just an ethical requirement, it is a practical one. A person who gives full value in their present work creates the conditions of trust, competence, and relationship from which new channels of exchange can grow. Half-completed work produces a partial channel. Complete work produces a complete one. Create contact where exchange can happen. The channel through which organized substance arrives as cash is never abstract. It is always a specific human contact, a relationship, a transaction, a service offered and received. The action that opens the channel must create that contact. This means moving toward the places, conversations, relationships, and opportunities where exchange is possible. The specific form of those contacts will differ for every person, but the principle is constant. Exchange requires contact, and contact requires action that creates it. Acting in the certain way means not chasing money from a position of panic. Panic produces a different quality of action than faith. Panicked action closes channels rather than opening them because it projects the consciousness of lack into every contact it makes. A person who is visibly desperate for money communicates that desperation, and desperation is repellent to the kind of exchange that opens genuine financial channels. Acting in the certain way means acting from the inner certainty of supply, not the inner terror of its absence. To act as the form made visible is the deepest description of what the certain way requires. The living thought being held is a specific financial reality that exists in the invisible. Acting as though that form is already real in the invisible, meaning conducting every action with the confidence, thoroughness, and quality of a person for whom supply is established, is the behavioral expression of the living thought. This is not pretense. It is the alignment of action with the inner form that has been impressed upon substance. Let action open the channel, not force it, not demand it, not construct it through anxiety and calculation from the assumption that the law is unreliable. Opening the channel means doing what efficient action calls for in the present moment and then allowing the organized substance to use that opening. The action creates the pathway. The organized substance uses it. The cash arrives as the evidence that the pathway was real. Trust the channel you are building, because you built it through the law. The absence of cash will test the living thought. This is not a failure of the law. It is the predictable condition that every practitioner of the Wattles method faces during the interval between invisible impression and visible result. The test has a specific feeling, a narrowing of the inner space, a pull toward the conclusion that the process has stopped, a temptation to dissolve the form and return to ordinary expectation. Knowing that this test will come is part of what allows a person to meet it without being undone by it. When doubt arrives, the first movement is to return to the living thought, not in an emergency, not in a panic, but with the deliberate, practiced movement of someone who knows where the form is and how to find it. The thought is still there. The impression is still in substance. The faith that held it before can hold it again. Returning to the living thought under doubt is not a sign of weakness. It is the specific act of faith that the interval was designed to require. Re-entering gratitude reactivates the connection to supply that doubt tends to close. Under doubt, the mind moves toward lack. Gratitude deliberately redirects it toward what is already present as evidence of the source's abundance. The capacity to think, the ability to act, the substance that is everywhere responsive, the form that is held invisibly and waiting to become visible. This is not performed gratitude. It is the genuine act of finding what is already real and acknowledging it until the relationship to supply reopens. Taking one channel opening action under doubt is the most powerful movement available. It does two things simultaneously. It reaffirms that the law is still in operation, that you have not surrendered to the visible absence of cash, and it physically continues the construction of the pathway through which cash must come. Even a small action, taken from a restored inner state, is evidence that the thought is still living and that the process is still underway. Refuse to call the process dead simply because the interval has extended. A longer interval than expected is not a dead process. It may mean that a larger organization of substance is underway, that the channel being formed is broader than was initially apparent, that the form requires more time to move from invisible impression to visible physical expression. Calling the process dead is the one act that can actually end it, because it withdraws the faith that keeps the impression coherent. Refuse it. The process ends when the law has been completed, not when doubt says it should have already finished. Consider a person who has done everything they understood as the metaphysical method. They have thought about wealth. They have felt the feeling of abundance. They have spoken the right words. They have waited. And the money has not come. Their account remains the same. Their income has not expanded. The gap between their inner work and their outer evidence has grown wide enough that something close to cynicism has begun to form in the place where faith used to be. This is not an unusual situation. It is the most common situation facing a person who has been practicing dead thought. The turning point comes when this person makes the thought definite. Instead of wealth in general, they form a specific financial reality and hold it with precision. They notice what happened internally in the moment they stopped being vague. The thought became heavier, more real, more demanding. It stopped being pleasant and started being operative. They began to feel the faith it required, because now there was a specific thing to have faith about. And they began to feel the action it required, because now there was a direction to move in. They act. They make a contact that felt inconvenient, or sent the communication they had been postponing, or offered their service in a place that was unfamiliar, not because they forced it, but because the living thought organized their movement toward the action most aligned with the specific form being held. And something responds. A conversation opens. An offer materializes that had no prior physical existence. An idea arrives during the action that creates a new pathway. The channel forms, not because they forced it, but because they built it through the combination of living thought and faithful, efficient action. Cash begins to move in the direction of this person, not all at once, not in the dramatic fashion of a sudden windfall. Through the channel that was built, through the exchange that became possible because the action created a contact that the organized substance could use. The money that arrives is not yet the full form they held, but it is the beginning of the evidence. It is proof that the conversion sequence is operating, that the living thought is alive and impressing, that the law is not an abstraction, but a process with a physical conclusion. This is not a story about one miraculous moment. It is a description of the law operating as it was designed to operate. The thought became specific, the action became efficient, the channel opened, the cash arrived as evidence. Every element of the conversion was present, and the result was lawfully produced. This is available to every person willing to replace dead thought with living thought, and waiting with the certain way. Thought becomes cash through law. This is the complete statement of what Wattles taught, and it has held its truth across every context it has been applied in, because the law does not operate within any particular economic system or time period. It operates within the nature of substance itself, and the nature of substance does not change. A thinking being who impresses a definite form upon the formless holds that form in faith, maintains the connection to supply through gratitude, and acts efficiently to open a physical channel, will see that form arrive as visible wealth. Every time the sequence is completed fully, the law delivers its result. The law requires form, faith, gratitude, and action. Not faith without form, which is hope without direction. Not form without faith, which is a picture without the conviction to hold it through the interval. Not form and faith without gratitude, which is a thought maintained in isolation from the source that supplies it. And not any combination of inner elements without efficient action, because the channel that brings cash into physical reality is always built by the hand of the person holding the living thought. All 4 elements are required. Any missing element is a gap in the sequence. Cash is evidence of completed conversion. This should be the final understanding a person carries away from this teaching. Cash is not the source of wealth. Cash is not the measure of spiritual alignment. Cash is not even the goal in its deepest sense. It is the physical proof that the invisible sequence has run its full course, that the organized substance has passed through the opened channel and arrived as transactional reality. Every dollar that arrives through this process is a report from the law. The conversion was completed. Every absence of cash is equally informative. Somewhere in the sequence, the conversion was interrupted. The old life of metaphysical practice without cash results has a recognizable shape. Vague thought about wealth. Time spent in pleasant fantasy without a specific formed impression. Waiting, called faith, but performing none of faith's actual function. A bank account that does not grow, not because the law is absent, but because the conversion was never completed. This is the pattern that holds so many genuinely sincere people in a cycle of effort and disappointment. The new life looks different at every stage. The thought is specific. The form is held in the mind with precision and returned to consistently. The faith is the quiet inner certainty that the organized substance is doing what the impressed form directed it to do, sustained across the interval without demanding visible confirmation. The action is efficient, present tense, aligned with the form, and understood not as an expression of doubt, but as an expression of the law. The cash evidence arrives through channels that the action opened. The old mind asks money to appear first. It positions wealth as the condition that must be met before it is willing to believe the law. Show me the money, and I will believe. But the law requires belief before the money. It requires the inner form, the sustained faith, the grateful connection, and the efficient action, all in the invisible phase, before the cash arrives as physical evidence. The old mind has the sequence reversed. It demands that visible cause precede inner effect, when the law moves precisely in the opposite direction. The new mind opens the channel. It does not wait for the money to arrive before believing the sequence is working. It does not demand visible confirmation at each stage of the invisible process. It constructs the channel through action taken in the certain way, keeps the form alive in faith, maintains the connection through gratitude, and understands the eventual arrival of cash not as a surprise, but as a consequence. The new mind treats cash as the lawful conclusion of a completed sequence, not as a gift from an unpredictable universe. Thought becomes cash when it stops being a passing idea and becomes a sustained inner form. This transformation, from idea to living form, is the most important shift in the entire process. An idea visits the mind. A form inhabits it. An idea leaves no lasting impression. A form is held with faith until it has impressed the substance deeply enough that the movement toward visible result has begun and cannot easily be reversed. The difference between the two is the difference between a fleeting hope and an operative cause. The living form must act until money has a channel. This is the synthesis of the entire teaching in a single directive. Not imagine until money appears, not hope until wealth is delivered. Act until a channel has been created through which organized substance can arrive as cash. The action is the final link between the invisible and the visible. It cannot be bypassed. It cannot be replaced by inner work alone, no matter how sincere or sustained. The channel requires the physical movement of the person who holds the living thought. Cash follows the law the way a river follows the land, not randomly, not occasionally, with the consistency of natural causation. A river does not choose to run downhill. The law does not choose whether to produce cash from a completed conversion. It simply does, because that is the nature of the law. The person who understands this stops treating wealth as a lottery and starts treating it as a sequence. Every sequence completed fully produces its result. Every interruption explains its own absence of result. Nothing is arbitrary. Nothing is capricious. The law is consistent. There is a moment when understanding must become commitment. This teaching has traced the sequence from living thought to physical cash. Every mechanism has been examined. Every interruption has been named. Every element of the law has been stated with the directness Wattles intended. What remains is not more knowledge. What remains is the inner choice to live inside this law rather than observe it from outside. That choice cannot be made by information alone. It is made by a decision that takes the form of a vow. The vow is simple and complete. My thought becomes cash through lawful action. This is not a positive affirmation designed to shift mood. It is a declaration of identity. A person who makes this declaration is choosing to be the kind of thinker whose thought impresses substance, holds the form in faith, connects to supply through gratitude, and acts in the certain way until cash has arrived as evidence of the completed conversion. That is who this person is now. Make it yours before the next section arrives. Something has shifted in you across this teaching, and the shift is worth naming. You came in carrying the frustration of thought that had not become money, and you leave with a different understanding of why. The gap between imagination and cash was never the law's failure. It was the gap between a passing idea and a living form. That gap is closable. It closes through precision, faith, gratitude, and the action that builds the channel. And now you know exactly where to apply each element. The declaration that belongs to you now is not a hope. It is a structural statement about how you operate. Write it, speak it, return to it each time the interval stretches and the account seems unchanged. My thought becomes cash through lawful action. Say it knowing what it means. It means your thought is definite. It means faith holds the form. It means gratitude keeps the connection to supply open. It means action builds the channel. It means the cash is the lawful evidence of the sequence you are running. This is who you are. Place that declaration in the comment section right now. Type the words and mean them as a vow. Every person who writes, "My thought becomes cash through lawful action," is making a commitment in the presence of others who are making the same one. That shared commitment is itself a kind of channel, a community of people who have chosen the living law over the dead thought. Take your place in it. If this teaching opened something in your understanding of Wallace Wattles, there is significantly more waiting. This channel exists to bring his work to its deepest expression. The hidden laws of wealth, the creative sequence, the nature of formless substance, the certain way, and the conversion of living thought into visible physical result. Subscribe and stay close, because the teachings that follow will continue building the same structure, layer by layer, until the law is not just understood, but inhabited. The subscription is an act consistent with what you have just learned, a specific, decisive action taken in the direction of the channel you want to open. Stay. From this moment, you stop holding dead thought. The vague imagining, the pleasant emotional fantasy about wealth, the half-formed hope that something will arrive without a channel being built, those habits have served their time. They carried you as far as partial understanding could carry you. The understanding is now complete, and complete understanding requires a different quality of inner life. The dead thought ends here. From this moment, you give thought a channel. The form is specific. The faith holds it. The gratitude connects you to the inexhaustible supply of the source. The action in the certain way builds the physical pathway through which organized substance arrives as cash. Nothing in that sequence is mysterious anymore. Nothing in it is beyond your reach. The law operates through you the same way it operates through every thinking being who meets its full requirements. Meet them, build the channel, let the substance use it. Thought becomes cash when the law is completed.